One of the things we try to do on this podcast is to bring psychological science to the public, so useful ideas and strategies have a chance to reach people who might otherwise not hear some of the information that could help them. Now, podcasts are, of course, not the only way to reach people. There are a ton of other platforms and venues that can spread good information and science to those who can use them most. My guest today is very active in a whole bunch of those other platforms and venues. My name is Eric Bowman. I'm the communications specialist at the Canadian Psychological Association, and this is Mindful. As a PhD student in psychology, you spend a lot of time acquiring a lot of knowledge as you prepare to embark on a rewarding career in the field of your choice. Know what to do with all that knowledge. Maybe you can spend time working or volunteering with a population who can benefit from your insights. Maybe you can host a podcast or a radio show that seeks to spread some of the wisdom you've attained. And maybe you can write a regular newspaper column or a children's book. Today, I want to introduce you to someone who is doing almost all of that.
Hello, my name is Sommer Knight. I am currently a PhD candidate studying clinical psychology at the University of Ottawa. I also do a lot of research centered on youth, families, Black mental health, culture, and mental health disparities.
That is a long list of things that to specialize in. Tell me how you got there in the first place. What brought you to psychology in the first place? Are you from Ottawa?
No. So I'm actually not from Ottawa. I'm actually born and raised in Toronto and ended up moving around. I actually studied at McGill as well too and did my master's in psychiatry. But essentially what led me there was more so that I really loved studying more about mental health, understanding it more. I feel like a lot of us go into it either because we relate to it or we have family or those we love relating to it. And so it was always an interest. And I love kids. I love their creativity. I love their imagination. I love that it's early intervention. And I thought it'd be a great way to use of my time, but also to make a difference.
And is that where you're planning to go once you complete your PhD, working with kids, and in what capacity?
Yeah, so I'm very grateful that at my program, I had a plethora of different experiences working in hospital settings in the youth psychiatry program, or working at the school board, working in private practice, doing assessments, or community centers. So I've had a wealth of experience that really informed my decision to do this.
And are you doing some of that right now?
Yeah, currently I am. Right now I'm at a school board and it's really great. I work on some days with elementary schools, some days with high school students. And so it's been great getting to know all the kids there.
And I presume that the elementary school kids are the ones that inspired this children's book that you've written. Tell me about this book. What was the genesis of it? What was the idea that you had that made you think there's a space for this children's book that I'm going to write?
Yes. So, what a beautiful question. So first, yes, definitely the kids that I've met. But to be honest, it started off with my own home. I have my own little brother who struggled a lot with mental health. And I felt like this conversation, especially within Black families and Black communities, sometimes there can be some stigma around it, or sometimes there's just not a lot of knowledge. Currently, research shows that there's an underdiagnosis of depression within Black communities. And I wanted to kind of start that conversation and to talk about the importance of validation. Today is a rainy day. It's really this sensitive and heartwarming story that's centered around a Black family that learns, the importance of patience and empathy and understanding and helping a loved one who is struggling with low mood or depression or quote unquote a rainy day. And so the story is told from the perspective of this sweet little Black girl, Imani, who has a very rambunctious nature, who's very curious, but also has a big heart and really wants to help this, sweet little guy, Isaiah, her little brother, who's just having a hard day and wanting to turn it into a sunny day.
And so are you taking your own personal experiences? I mean, are you the main character in this book?
Well, I'm grateful that I had a little team. So it's myself and my co-author, Desiree Barnett, and our incredible illustrator, Naylisa Joy Aristide. And we came together because we realized we had a shared story of our experiences. All of us relate to different characters. For me, I relate more so to Mom. I empathize more with her warm, empathetic approach. My other co-author really loves Imani, again, because of her very curious but funny nature. And the illustrator relates to Dad in this story because of his calm, collected, and playful energy that reminds her of her own dad. So we all brought little pieces, and hopefully it resonates with everyone who reads it.
Now, you mentioned a little bit about stigma in Black communities when it comes to mental health, and you're hoping to break a little bit of that. Would you say that that is aimed toward the kids who are going to read this book, or the parents who are going to read it with them, or both? I mean, is there a lot of both of that in there?
Yes, there is both. And that's what I find the beauty with this book. And for me, the beauty of some children's book. Like I was personally inspired to write this book because growing up, I loved children's book. Like my favorite author was Robert Munsch and the classic I Love You Forever, because it's a heartwarming story that stays with you as a kid until you're an adult, that it reaches different audiences. And through Today is a Rainy Day, there's so many different ways to relate. You could either relate to little Isaiah, who is struggling with a low mood and having a hard time, that is withdrawing, that is more irritable, that isn't sleeping or eating well. You could relate to Amani, who's seeing someone that you love and not understanding why are they acting differently? What's going on? How can I help them? You can relate to mom and try to figure out the best way as a caregiver, how to support your child through this process, figuring out what's unhelpful but also helpful. And so this book is really starting a dialogue on emotion literacy and understanding that it's okay to have big feelings and that they're a way for us to support our loved ones in a way that's validating for them. And that's sort of the message of it all.
All right, you're a lot younger than I am, but when I was very young here in Ottawa and going to school, Robert Munsch would actually come into our school and read to us. So I got to actually experience him, like the I Love You Forever book. I know the tune of that song because he sang it to us in school. I can still remember it. And he would do all the voices and like the paper bag princess and all that.
Oh my gosh. See, I'm so jealous already.
Yeah, I was probably, I don't know, I guess 7 or 8 years old. And yeah, he would come in and do tours of schools in Ottawa. And I presume he would go all over Canada. I don't know if he's from Ottawa, but I saw him at least twice here.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So you saw him twice. Okay. I hope when I get to see him once or
Kids' books, I mean, so few, I guess, become those kind of classics, the Robert Munsch books or the Goodnight Moon that we all have sort of as a cultural touchstone sort of thing, right? Are there any children's books in the Black community that you would think of in that way that are sort of well known and well read?
Yeah, so for me, that's where Today is a Rainy Day, I feel like is a perfect book that fits that gap. A book that really touches on the mental health experience from a children's perspective, but with, the Black lens and the Black cultural lens and that piece. I think there was a piece for me, at least growing up, it was difficult at times to find myself represented in certain spaces or to see characters that look like me, either, with my curly hair or, certain facial features. And what I really like about Today is a Rainy Day, and I'm grateful for those that have read it and personally told me, is that they saw themselves in these characters. Like even just the small details of the little Black action figures that exist or
Right.
all these different pieces that they can relate to. And so for me, there wasn't at the time a book that I can clearly recall, but of course, I feel like there's been way more that's been coming out lately. And it's beautiful to see that there's so many different diverse stories and so many different perspectives and such fun, creative ways to entertain kids, but also help them learn. And I hope Today is a Rainy Day can do that as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we miss. I say we in the psychology world. I'm not a psychologist, but I work with them, right? It's one thing to do research. It's one thing to publish studies. It's one thing to try to mobilize knowledge in a certain way, but creative ways of reaching people, like writing a children's book, like that kind of thing. I believe you also host a radio show. I say, as I stalked your LinkedIn before we met here, tell me a little bit about that. What's that like?
Yeah, so that was another fun opportunity. So I do currently, I did do a radio show. The season one's completed. We might plans for the next season to come up, but the show is called Think About It. And it's really an opportunity to really explore the nuances of mental health with more of a cultural perspective and to just really start the dialogue again. I've had the opportunity through Think About It to talk more about different experiences with mental health that maybe aren't explored as much. For example, talking about different coping strategies that exist within the Black community that may be more spiritual or cultural, or talking about different sort of intersectional identities that exist and how that can impact one's mental health. And I've had really incredible guests, but I started that really out of an opportunity to really just do something. Community involvement has always been incredibly important to me. It's been something that I've always held as a big value. For me, community has really been synonymous with family. Like I am the product of my village, those that have mentored me, those that have supported me. And it was an opportunity for me to connect with people in a different way. I feel like, as someone who does research, of course, I see the value in our research articles, but they're really often limited to those that are just in the field, not so much the public that really get access to this or are really able to find these journals or have access to these databases. And I wanted to reach people and meet them where they're at. So if it's, meeting them through, this radio show and just having more intimate, fun conversations about mental health, if it's a cute little picture book to reach little kiddos at schools or public libraries that are accessible to them that can start these conversations. I wanted to make this more accessible for people in a way that's understandable and digestible for them, but also fun and interesting and engaging.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the other things that is sort of an issue is that the stuff that people do consume, which may be books, but it also may be TikTok content, or it may be radio shows, or it may be some of these things. It's hard for people to wade through what is real and what isn't, like what's true, what's good information, what's bad information. It's very difficult. So the more good information we can put out there, I imagine the better. So tell me a little bit about the research that you do as a PhD student and how that's informed things like this radio show, like this book that you've created.
Yeah, so for me, so I have to say my love for research really stemmed from my experience at McGill. I had the opportunity to study in their psychiatry department. I was working with a psychiatrist at the time at the Children's General Hospital. And it was interesting because it wasn't just psychiatry in terms of like diagnosis and these sort of drug interventions, but it was like cultural psychiatry, social psychiatry, looking more at this intersection between culture and mental health. And that really laid the foundation for my wanting to study this more, to wanting to explore these topics more. And from that, I ended up studying at the time, I was focusing more on first episode psychosis within Black communities because there is sort of an ongoing medical trend of this overdiagnosis of psychosis. It could be attributed to maybe assessment bias, or it could be attributed to potential racism. It could be attributed to clinician bias. There's so many different factors that can play into these reasons for why these such higher levels. But I wanted to explore it more. I wanted to research it more. And what I love about research as well is that I like qualitative research, the opportunity to interview people and to get to hear their stories and lived experiences, because it just makes the data and statistics that you find just more richer when you understand more of the meaning and the stories behind it all. And so from that incredible experience, from interviewing people to looking at chart reviews and doing analyses, I realized in working with those groups that I wanted to do a bit more research on children. And so that kind of led me to switch to child clinical psychology at U Ottawa. And so my research there is still in qualitative. I'm doing research projects related to immigrant mothers and that parent dynamic and trying to understand, how to make sense of the current culture and the past culture in terms of raising your kids. Also, just research that I'm doing is centered on intersectionality and bullying with kids from different backgrounds and how they cope with that. And then my research that I'm also doing now, we're centered on Black mental health and figuring out better coping strategies to deal with different challenges that come through people's way. And so it's been really great. What I love about research is that it translates, whether it's to clinical interventions to improve things or to maybe inform more advocacy efforts. And so it's been fun all around.
Yeah. Just to go back for 1 second, you said first episode psychosis. Can you define that for me? What does that mean?
Oh my gosh, yes. So, so much medical jargon. My apologies. First episode psychosis essentially refers to these first presenting of symptoms related to when people experience either different areas. So, it could be hallucinations where they're either sort of seeing things that may not be there, hearing things that may not be there, feeling things that may not be there. It could also include delusions. So, maybe certain ideas or beliefs individuals have. Sometimes it could be persecutory, believing that someone's going to come after you. Sometimes it could be different forms and types, but it's really essentially these first presenting of these symptoms. And when they happen, it could be brought on by so many different things. Sometimes it's lack of sleep. Sometimes it's amount of stress someone is in. Sometimes it could be sort of brought forth by different drugs or things that people use, or sometimes it could just be heavily genetic at times where it can pass on from someone else. And so those are kind of the experiences and what I'm referring to in terms of first episode psychosis. And it can happen. I know the people that I was seeing, they were young as 16.
Right.
Or old as later on in age, but it is quite prevalent and it is a concern as well too.
Now, you mentioned bullying within immigrant communities, or I guess not within the communities, but related to immigrant communities. We just did a podcast episode on something of a very similar nature, which was talking about bullying in schools and how the bullying that happens in school tends to be reflective of the society writ large, right? The people who get bullied in society writ large are the same people who get bullied in school, which is a microcosm of a larger systemic problem. And so I'm just wondering if you can speak a little bit more about that, the work that you're doing in that space, where I presume you're working with kids who are dealing with that. And I think one of the things that we've had a really hard time with over the last several years is specifically addressing bullying. And a lot of that is because we haven't come up with a great response for it, maybe not a great prevention structure for it either. And also the solutions that often take shape in schools, I guess, don't address things like the things you were talking about, intersectionality and, the different types of bullying that affect different groups.
So, excellent topic. I'm glad that there was an opportunity to have that discussion on another episode. So, yeah, I guess the lens that I can add is more of this intersectional piece. So, with myself and my other incredible colleagues in our lab at the Cultural Diversity and Youth Development Lab, run by my supervisor, Dr. Irene Budarulis, we came together to do a project on sort of mental health and bias-based bullying, but also cyberbullying and looking at it among sort of youth in different school context. And essentially what we found was that the more marginalized identities one has, whether it's based on their race, whether it's based on their gender or sexuality, whether it's based on their immigrant status, all these different factors play a role, and it creates more experiences or reports of poor mental health outcomes. And so when we talk about intersectionality, credited by Crimbley Crenshaw, we're referring to these different social constructs that we all have that can, vary the level of maybe privilege one experiences in one context or marginalization experience in one context. And so what we found essentially was that, again, those that experience more marginalized identities, they're experiencing more of those isms,
Right.
homophobia, whether it's sexism, all those different isms play a role and impact sort of the mental health outcomes and lead to poor outcomes for these groups. And so, what does that say? That, these groups, they need more support in different ways, and how that can be provided. We have to get creative. We need to figure out ways to make them feel more safe and more welcome, because it is concerning. You want to be able to send your kid to school and to make sure that they make friends and to have a good time, but that's not the reality for everybody. And so it's looking at ways of how can we have maybe more school-based interventions that can, create more spaces, or working partner with community support groups, or looking at different avenues and ways to make school a place where kids want to learn and they want to stay there and they have a good time. Because for me, school and and I'm at the school board right now, it's not just a place for academic learning, but it's such an incredible environment for people to develop peer connections and to learn and to create, relationships with others. And we want to make sure that fostering of connections with peers is positive, so that way they can have good social development and skills and relations with others interpersonally going forward.
There's a lot of research now that is really showing the effects of things like racism downstream and the mental health effects that occur as a result. And a lot of that's coming out of Ottawa U. Is that one of the reasons that you went to the University of Ottawa? I know that there's a significant psychology department focus on, the effects of racism and cultural differences.
Yeah, so U Ottawa, I had the opportunity to study here. And to be honest, whenever I was applying for programs, I usually look for like supervisor fit.
Right.
And so my supervisor, Dr. Irene Vudarulis, she was doing a lot of research in an area that I was interested in, and I felt like it would be a great fit in terms of developmental piece and the cultural piece, but also the U Ottawa environment. I'm grateful that when I had the opportunity to be here, that there was opportunity for us to have more difficult conversations and for us to try and make some changes and to do different things to do research in this area. Everyone that's on my thesis committee, has all that experience. Dr. Monica Williams, Dr. Jude Sinat, the opportunity to publish with colleagues, that are in my clinical program on increasing BIPOC representation in psychology doctoral programs. And it's seeing these changes and seeing these efforts that are being made that it's really nice to see have happened. But of course, there's always room for growth. There's always room for improvement, but it's nice to get started on that.
Yeah, I think your whole thesis committee has appeared on this podcast at one time or another. So going forward then, you're pursuing your PhD, you're writing children's books, you're hosting a radio show. What's the plan in the immediate future leading up to that PhD? How's the thesis going, and what do you expect to have come out of it?
Oh, the classic question for all doctors. How is your thesis going? How is it happening? I actually was sitting and reflecting on it because I'm like, I'm hitting towards the end. I'm planning to defend in August. So in like 8 months to wrap up and to finish things. And so I am making great progress in terms of my research. I'm almost done. We're on the second phase of the study. So now it's going to be administering surveys and just getting feedback from the student population that I have here, and then just writing it up and then defending it. So research is going good in terms of my clinical experience. I'm at the school board. I've been to 4 different sites. And so this is going to be the informative one to help me decide, do I want to stay with more school psychology with kids, or do I want to work in different settings? But it's been really great and I've been really enjoying it. But in terms of next steps after this, I think I realized that I also love teaching. I know I keep adding all these different things that I'm doing. I'm like, I'm going to be a children's author. I'm going to.
Aren't you doing it wrong? I mean, aren't you supposed to go through school to like check off all the things that you don't want to do so that you can narrow the focus? You're just adding more things that you want to do.
Thank you so much for the validation. That feels great. But yeah, I do. I feel like we are students, but we're so much more than that. We all have so many incredible gifts and talents. So I'm like, why not use it? But yeah, I love teaching. I had the opportunity to teach, I teach a mini course program with a bunch of like high school and students like ages like 13 to 16 every summer for a week. And I teach this mental health course where I talk about mental health. What is it really? And it's really fun where I get to talk with these kids and get their perspectives on mental health and really teach them coping strategies. Because people think with therapy or anything of that sort, it's like you're good when you're happy, and I'm like, no, you're good when you know that things are hard and difficult, but you can get through it because you can cope with it and you have the skills to do it. And through that class, we learned that when we change I to we, mental illness becomes mental wellness, and it requires asking for help. It requires for not being alone and for getting the support, and that it's okay to get that. And so I love teaching. I realized that's something I really enjoyed working and just being able to maybe inspire the next generation. And they inspire me as well, too, and I hope that I can get to do that in the future.
That'd be great. I love teaching too. Like it's something. There's something about it where you even the small victories feel huge and fulfilling, right?
Like, I feel like teachers, like, they sometimes are undervalued because the impact that they have for kids is immense. Even I'm at the school board, I'm like, I see how hard these teachers are working, that for some of them, they are maybe a parent for some kids who don't have any. The way that they bring, they consider, know the needs of these kids, or the way that they empathize with parents who may be struggling a bit more with things, and they help them with certain areas. Like, there's such beauty and a lot of work that goes behind the job that I feel like maybe not recognized or I celebrated. But the teachers out there, I appreciate you. You're making a real difference. And yeah, I hope I can help in that area.
I also love that turn of phrase that you just used, and I've never heard that before. If you change I to we, then you change mental illness to mental wellness. It feels a little like something that belongs on a throw pillow, but also something very profound. You know what I mean? Like that's a where did that turn of phrase come from? I love that one.
Yeah, no, I came across that back at Western. So I did my undergrad at Western University. And at the time, I was president of the Western Psychology Association. And I think it was a period where it was like a mental health day or national, some sort of day related to mental health. And we wanted to do something. And it was one of the members in our group when we had our little exec meeting that mentioned this phrase. And I just loved it so much because I feel like it's so true. I feel like as someone myself who has struggled with mental health and had challenges, like it's hard when you're in the moment and it can feel very difficult, but it's important to remember that you're not alone and that there is support out there and that there are people that want to help you and that it's okay to feel what you're feeling. And there's just such a comfort in that collective piece. And as also someone who's just been raised in sort of that collectivistic sort of Black culture, the aspect of community is just so much more pronounced and so much more valuable. Like there's just not enough words to explain the beauty of community and the way that we can hold space for each other. I just think is very precious and sacred, and I just hope everyone else can feel that on days that they're having a rainy day or.
Yeah. Now, is that something that you try to instill in kids, or is that something that they sort of come pre-loaded with, the sense of community? Is that something that you have to create as someone who's helping out, or is that something that you have to foster because it already exists? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think to be honest, we all come with our own individualistic and collectivistic tendencies. I think we all are on a different spectrum, and I think we all have a little bit of each. Of course, in our sort of North American culture, we're more individualistic in terms of maybe our goals, our aspirations, or, in terms of what we do, in terms of ambition, it may be more seen as this like individual sort of self-fulfillment piece. Whereas other cultures, it can be more collectivistic and more centered on community and more centered on others. And I feel like we all have a little bit of both. I had the other opportunity, another project. I feel like I'm realizing that I'm probably doing so much. I had a really fun opportunity to do this research on women and ambition, and I did it with a friend of my colleague, Sophia Gran-Ruaz, and Miranda Kelly and Ria as well. It was a nice, fun group of all of us, and we really wanted to explore how people perceive this concept of ambition and how do they define it and what does that mean for them. And just interviewing the men of women we did here who were in academia as old as, like later on in age or as young as now, some, with kids, some without kids, some with different intersectional identities. And it was cool to see that this concept of ambition wasn't just this individual concept, it was more of a collective piece as well too. And it really made me realize that we all have these individualistic and collectivistic points. And I think there are moments where maybe we can nurture a bit of that collectivistic piece in some contexts, especially in terms of the emotional development, because these all emotions together.
Okay, tell me a little more about that. What is collective ambition versus individual. I think we all have a sense of what individual ambition entails, what that means, attaining a goal of some kind. What is collective ambition? Ambition as a community.
Yeah, so with the women, it was interesting to see that this idea of ambition, that it wasn't just centered on self. It was this idea of women talking about how they wanted to help others. It wasn't just, I want to succeed in this field. I want to help other women succeed in this field. So that way we can break this glass ceiling effect or that may be experienced, or address this gender gap in wage, because research was showing that women were not as published or not as funded in terms of research, or not invited as much for conferences. There are all these different gaps that were showing up. And it was interesting to see that women, in terms of their drive for things, it was more so they wanted to support other women in that aspect, or that when they were talking about the collectivist piece, it was also just this desire for family and wanting to, they have to balance academia, but also their family, especially if they were parents, and wanting to make sure that that family piece was well in order to. So it wasn't just never their idea of like just myself. It was always in relation to other people and how they wanted to make it a collective success and not just an individual one.
I like that. I like the framing of ambition as something collective in that way. Just because I think sometimes ambition gets a bad reputation, because in order to succeed, very often you have to push others out of the way, or you're taking someone else's spot, or you're doing right. But I've always been a big proponent of this idea that a rising tide lifts all boats, and that, if you can frame it in that way, I like that quite a bit. Is that the way you see? I mean, I'm guessing you're quite ambitious because you're doing 800 things all at once. So is that the way that you envision your own ambition?
Yeah, I that was part of my reflective exercise when I was pursuing this topic. Like, what does ambition mean to me, And for me, of course, success is subjective, but for me, ambition has always been collective. Everything I do is not just for myself. I do it in honor of my ancestors. I do it for the current generation with me, and I do it for the generation to come, and that's always been my drive. My role model growing up has always been Maya Angelou, because I've always been inspired by her work. She is the woman and the writer and the scholar and the activist I aspire to be. And her works on Still I Rise stay with me, on this idea that no matter what happens, that we can still rise and we can still overcome and we can still, succeed and do what we want to do. And that, there's that piece as well for me where everything that I've had, it's always because of mentors before me or those that have helped support me to get to this spot. And so I never see my success as anything individual, because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the mentors and supervisors that showed me that I, as a Black woman, have a voice in this field. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my community that helped me get the financial support I needed to get to where I needed to do. So I really am a product of the people around me. And I see the success as not just my own, but everyone who supported me along the way.
Yeah. And Maya Angelou, a writer, activist, you can list 100 things and you're barely scratching the surface of what that woman actually did, right? She did 8,000 things and did them all extremely well. That is a very ambitious person to look up to, right? And you've mentioned two people now in our conversation, Maya Angelou and Robert Munsch. So both of them writers. You have written this children's book. Is writing something that's a passion for you? Is that something you're going to pursue?
I know. To be honest, I've always loved, there's always a power in language for me and a power of words. Another thing that I've done. Actually, earlier this year, I was a part of the spoken word event. It was this Ottawa art showcase. It was aired on Rogers TV, and I had the opportunity to do spoken word, which has always been a love of mine, but I've always scared to do publicly. And of course, I ended up doing it publicly on TV. But to me, there's such a beauty in the power of language and the way that it's able to elicit or describe things that may be difficult at times to maybe say, that you can kind of put in words in a way that's so beautifully that can resonate with people and elicit certain emotions, and it's just so vulnerable. And I find with writing, for me, it's always been a safe space for me and an opportunity to express myself in different creative, linguistic ways. And I find that creativity so fun and so entertaining. And I hope that with others who read Today is a Rainy Day, that they can get that same experience. And another person that I've always really enjoyed was Rupi. She's this Canadian poet, and she has a book called Homebody that I really, really loved. And her quote will always stay with me that there's nothing more whole, more intimate than a mind and body that's decided to be whole. And I think it's just this idea of being able to be my whole self in writing and being able to present these feelings and emotions in a way that I don't think I could do as beautifully spoken, but in writing I can do.
So for people who want to experience the whole of you in writing in this book, where can they go to pick up Today is a Rainy Day?
Yes. So for anyone who would love to read Today is a Rainy Day, a nice, beautiful, sensitive, heartwarming story, you can check it out on Amazon. If you go on Amazon, it's available on any marketplace worldwide, Canada, the US, anywhere. But you could type Today is a Rainy Day on Amazon and you'll be able to get a copy. It's available in paperback as well in ebook format, and audio is coming soon to make it accessible for other people as well. Mm-hmm.
All right, we will put that in the show notes of today's episode. And where can people go to listen to your radio show?
Yeah, so to listen to the radio show, you can check out at ACAO, A-C-A-O, Talk Radio. And there you'll be able to find our links to our streams and different episodes that are available. And also, Today's a Rainy Day also launched its official Instagram page. So you can also check out at Today's a Rainy Day, and you can find more information there as well. Mm-hmm.
All right. And I think we only have a couple of minutes left here. Anything else you want to plug?
Anything else I want to plug?
No, anything else? The floor is yours.
The floor is mine. Well, first, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity and for just giving me a platform to just share and to let everyone know about this really, really meaningful project that means the world to me and to the others on my team. For those that do get the opportunity to read this book, I really, really hope that this book can really resonate with you and connect with you, that it's not just for kids, but anyone of all ages, that, you know, that the rain that you have above your head, that I hope it turns into a beautiful rainbow, and that you all have more sunny days instead of rainy days.
A terrific sentiment that I share. I, too, hope all of you who are listening have more sunny days than rainy ones. And I thank you for listening, streaming, downloading, and sharing today's episode. Thanks also to Sommer for taking the time to speak with me. Links to the many, many things she's doing are in the show notes. Mindful is written, hosted, recorded, and published by me, Eric Bowman. Our editor and producer is Jamie Montgomery, and our theme music is Avenues by David Taylor.